Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Eliminate and Motivate, How to Identify and Address Front Office Staff Burnout. I'm Adam Rubenfire, Content Manager at Phreesia, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. Today, our speaker will discuss how to identify, treat, and prevent burnout among administrative staff within your organization. Before we begin, I'll take just a brief moment to share some housekeeping notes and introduce our speaker before they get started. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A widget at the top left-hand corner of your screen, and I'll ask as many questions as time allows after the presentation. In the resource widget on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll find a one-page overview of Phreesia and links to 2 blog posts on our website, one about how to manage staffing shortages and another about how to ensure administrative staff burnout doesn't impact your patient experience. Now, if you have any technical difficulties, which we hope you won't, but if you do, click on the help widget. It has a question mark icon and it covers common issues. And since it's always one of the most frequently asked questions, this session's being recorded and we'll share a copy of the recorded presentation by the end of the week. Finally, a few quick words about Phreesia. Phreesia is the nation's leader in patient intake, and we're guided by our overarching mission of creating a better, more engaging experience for patients, providers, and staff. Our innovative platform enables our clients to improve efficiency, enhance clinical care, and give patients the convenient, flexible experience they prefer. We're proud to have been top ranked in patient intake management by KLAS for 4 years in a row, and we're dedicated to helping staff. So we're so excited to be having this presentation about burnout. So to learn more, you can visit Phreesia.com. You can also request a consultation using the drop-down on the right-hand side of your screen. Now I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Paul DeChant. Dr. DeChant is an expert on burnout, speaking about it frequently at conferences, contributing to published work on the topic, and coaching leaders in their organizations about how to solve for it. His knowledge about burnout comes from over 30 years of experience in patient care and operational leadership as a practicing physician, a medical group leader, and a consultant to C-level healthcare executives. That includes 5 years as a CEO of the Sutter Gould Medical Foundation, a 300-physician multi-specialty group in California's Central Valley. Dr. DeChant, thank you so much for being with us today. I'll pass the floor on to you to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Adam, so much. It's really my pleasure to be here because I know the front desk people, the people who manage and get patients to me as a physician are some of the most important people engaged in patient care and have many of the same struggles that everyone else on the team does. So I'm really happy to help you be able to think through, how do you address this growing challenge of burnout? So let's dive right into it, because it doesn't really make sense. You've got a job where you help people when they're anxious and they need medical care, where you help them think through what are the treatment options, support the rest of the team in the office to make sure that everything runs smoothly, and work on improvements and innovation to make patient care better. When you think about it, this is a pretty professionally fulfilling job. And yet, in fact, your friends and family probably wonder, if you describe being burned out, what's wrong when you've got such a cool job that you can do? But they don't get to follow you into the office and see the real challenges, the challenges of dealing with insurance companies who may be questioning the basic care that you're providing, the challenges of dealing with patients who've been fed a lot of misinformation and come in often angry, and multiple other challenges that get related to a whole variety of IT systems and other complexity. And in fact, those push us so hard, we start to feel that burnout, but it's not a lack of your ability to cope. Burnout is not a lack of individual resilience. Heck, you wouldn't be doing this job if you weren't a resilient person to start with. The problem is that the workplace itself is so complex and so challenging that it's almost impossible in many cases to do the job effectively without good support. In fact, the World Health Organization has defined burnout as an occupational phenomenon. It's not a personal failing. It's a problem where the workplace has become so challenging. Burnout manifests in you as an individual because of the dysfunctional challenges in the workplace. Now, those show up in yourself as 3 manifestations. The first is exhaustion. When you've just given everything you've got, at the end of the day, you may feel like you've got nothing left to give. When we get to that point, it's normal to start to protect yourself from your patients, perhaps even protect yourself from your coworkers or your boss. We call that cynicism. And we put those two things together. If you're depleted and you're distancing yourself, you start to wonder, am I really making a difference here? That sense of inefficacy, which often happens in the very interaction where you're with a patient, helping them out. The patient may actually be appreciating what you're doing, but you're just at a point where you're disconnected enough, you wonder if you're really making a difference. I think it's one of the saddest of the three manifestations, actually, of burnout. Now, these manifestations were identified by Dr. Christina Maslach. She's a professor emerita from University of California, Berkeley, who's been a leader in this field for over 40 years. And it's been my pleasure actually to get to know her. And as I've gotten to know her, I learned not only were these three manifestations of burnout important, but there's drivers of burnout. The first driver of burnout is work overload. Hey, that's probably not a surprise. There's just too much to do working in a chaotic, time-pressured environment. And that work overload, Dr. Maslach demonstrated, actually drives that manifestation of emotional exhaustion. And that's what most people think burnout is. I'm overloaded. I'm exhausted. I just, that's all I've got. I've given it all. And it is a key component of burnout, but it's not all there is. The good thing about knowing this is that we can address work overload by redesigning workflows. And when we do that and we bring in intelligent IT, we can regain work-life balance and our ability to really focus on caring for our patients effectively when we're working in the office. But there's more to burnout than this. And as Dr. Maslach demonstrated, when you're overloaded, you start to wonder if you really feel like you have the control you need to do your job effectively. Lack of control is the second driver of burnout. It's kind of something you expect. As you get better at your job, you should have that ability to make decisions, to do the right thing at the right time when you know you need to. It's kind of one of those intangible rewards you would look for as you get better at your work. And in fact, insufficient rewards, well, that's the third driver of burnout. Not only is it that sense of, I've done a good job, I deserve to be able to do my job well, but it's also a sense of collegiality. Generally, people who work in healthcare are nice people. We're fun to hang out with, but we're finding it's harder and harder to connect with each other. We're seeing breakdown of community, the fourth driver of burnout. You may be in the same room with people, but people are so busy paying attention to their devices or something else that we don't often connect the way that we should and we used to. The fifth driver of burnout is absence of fairness. This shows up in so many ways in our work and in our society. It's you go to work, you think I'm here to help people, and patients come in angry because of something that they've heard somewhere else and transfer that anger onto you unfairly. Or as you may be assessed or treated in a way that has nothing to do with the contribution that you're making to the workplace. Some people, unfortunately, are thought of less because of something they have no control over, such as their gender, their race, their country of origin, or their sexual orientation. And as the workforce becomes more and more diverse, this becomes a more and more important problem, which is why the DEI work that many organizations pursue is now so vital. Lastly, there's a question of whether there's a values conflict. Do your personal values really align with the organization you're working with, or with something that might happen during the course of the day that you have to participate in or witness that really violates your personal values? Now, all of these other five drivers of burnout, they have to do with the culture in your organization and with leadership. Whether you're leading a group as small as 2 or 3 coworkers, or you're leading an organization with thousands of people in it, how you lead really drives the impact of these 5 drivers. And when we don't manage these well, we drive that cynicism, that second manifestation of burnout. When we handle these well, instead of approaching things with a top-down command and control approach, and think about how we can empower and align everyone together, well, that's when we get true engagement. And that's the real opportunity to make a difference. What Maslach, also, it's interesting to look at comparing Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Maslach's drivers of burnout. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, These are the steps that someone goes through in order to really achieve their full potential as a human being. It starts at the baseline with your own physiologic needs. And these actually can get pretty negatively impacted by work overload. If you've ever been in a situation where you denied your hunger pains and kept working through them because there was too much work to do, and you just needed to get that work done, the patient needs were so urgent, or perhaps you were really exhausted, but you denied taking a rest because there was just that too much work to do and the patient needs were great. Or now wait for it, and you've probably been there. If you've ever denied your urge to pee, to use the restroom, because there was just too much work to do and you had to take care of that patient, well, we've all been there, right? And when we're overloaded and then we start to feel a sense of losing control, well, lack of control has an impact on safety. And breakdown of community has an impact on that sense of love and belonging. Fairness and rewards challenges, they'll impact your self-esteem. And values conflicts will impact self-actualization. So your own ability to really achieve your full potential as a person can be impacted by these drivers of burnout. Another interesting thing that we've learned comes from the field of human factors engineering, which looks at the cognitive overload that hits our brain when we're trying to do these high demanding jobs. Because when we're in those positions, we get an increase in cortisol hormone release that actually increases damages the arteries and can decrease blood flow to the brain. We see excess glutamate, a neurotransmitter that can decrease your ability to have good fine motor control, and anatomic changes over time to your brain with thinning of a prefrontal cortex, enlargement of the amygdala, which actually increases the way you react to stress, less ability to control your reactions, and the hippocampus shrinking, which impacts short-term memory. I don't know how long you've been around, but if you were ever around when Ronald Reagan was president, his wife Nancy led this campaign said, just say no to drugs, a war on drugs. They had a commercial where a guy held up an egg, said, this is your brain, cracked it into a frying pan and said, this is your brain on drugs getting fried. Well, this is your brain on burnout. How did burnout happen in healthcare? Remember, the problem is not you. The problem is not the workers. The problem is the workplace. And how did it get so challenging? Well, it really didn't have to do with anything more than what's happened over the last 20 plus years. There's been all of these external forces, and just here's a few of them that you can see that have impacted us. You can probably relate to most of them. We've seen the introduction of the electronic health record and everything that brought with it in terms of the government insisting on meaningful use, which made it more complex. New coding systems like ICD-10 or the new E&M coding, which then the payers use to delay or deny claims or demand increased prior authorization. The government's been trying to help out with MIPS and MACRA and other things, trying to create a value-based payment, basing value on patient satisfaction, like the HCAHPS and CGCAHPS. Well, when we start doing that, we realize it's tough to make a lot of patients happy because of the situations we're in, particularly because patients are changing. They're older, they're sicker, they're more complex, they're more culturally and linguistically diverse. Even the ones that were consistent with us, they've consulted Dr. Google, don't come in asking for help, come in demanding that we give them something they want. Oftentimes that's opioids. We used to give a lot of pain meds, now we don't. Patients get angry if they don't get the meds. We'll see violence happen in our workplaces. So there's real challenges here. We could get rid of patient satisfaction scores through the government. We'd still have Yelp scoring us. So there's just kind of a no-win situation going on across all of this. Mergers and acquisitions are also going on all the time. Your practice may have been acquired into another practice, or you might have bought the practice down the street. And now you're working with people that you kind of know, you work in the same field, but it may not be that working so tightly together. And ultimately, we're getting paid less for all of this. We've just absorbed each of these things as they've come in over the last 20 years. And because as long as we could still know that we were making a difference for our patients, we just figured out our way around all these. But it's gotten to the point where this is too much. And now, in fact, it feels like we have added the last straw. We can't take one more thing. And we need other help. Because if we don't get it, what we see before the pandemic were people burning out with injuries, depression, substance abuse, taking that frustration home to your family, making it even worse there. And this has an impact directly on what happens in the office and the ability of our offices to actually be financially stable. Because as our performance worsens due to burnout, and if we're paid based on the value, we may be getting paid less per each unit of service we provide. And the doctors, as they feel like they can't do any more, they start cutting back on their hours. So we're doing fewer units of service, getting paid less for each one. That's really hard to make a good financial success when you're doing things in that way. This similar impact really has been on administrative staff, on the people who lead the organization, on the people who are there at the front desk. Everyone is suffering from this. Well, that was before the pandemic. And what happened then? Well, along came this little guy, COVID-19, that took over everything and created this VUCA environment, an existential threat. Things were changing so rapidly. There was no clarity about what was going on. The complexity of the multiple variables and no real precedent existed for what to do next. If you were working in the office back in March 2020, you probably remember this. We changed so quickly. We had to, in a week, go from being in, doing pretty much every visit in the office to 90% of the visits being virtual. Everything was upended. You ended up working, instead of from the office, you may well have ended up working from home, trying to do the same job you were doing in the office, but doing it from home. Just complete disruption to everything that was going on. And now we've gotten used to it, but the question starts to become, is this really sustainable where we're at now? Because as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing the biggest increase in exhaustion that we've ever seen. And healthcare call volumes have increased 90% from pre-pandemic levels. And systems are laying people off in the process. Its question becomes, can we both beat burnout and build the bottom line as we're going through these things? So many reactions to burnout say, well, let's work less and give people lots of emotional support. Working less and reduces revenue, giving emotional support does cost some money. If that's all we do, we actually reduce the margins that are left over, the profit that's left over, to pay our salaries. So we've got to find a way to do it differently. There is a good way, and a good model actually that's come out of Stanford, that looks at three things to think about. The first being personal resilience and enhancing that. The second is improving efficiency in your practice. And the third is actually addressing the management system and culture. So let's look first at personal resilience. To improve personal resilience and improve your well-being and support, having an organization focus on whether it's a center or a committee or a group of people that come together and say, let's work on making things better for ourselves. Let's take care of each other and take care of ourselves. It's based on this core premise that self-care is not selfish. That's a hard one sometimes for people in healthcare, because we are so giving. We wouldn't go into healthcare if we didn't care about others and feel like we needed to sacrifice to help others. There's some good-natured reward in knowing you're sacrificing yourself to help someone else, but we can't do it to the point where we sacrifice ourselves so much there's nothing left to give. And unfortunately, many of us have been through that situation. So this taking care of ourselves is absolutely vital. It's also absolutely insufficient if we're going to really solve the problem. What is important to do in addition? Well, first of all, improving efficiency. We do this when we improve efficiency, we can reduce work overload and exhaustion, we can regain work-life balance. And so we do this with workflow redesign, with the optimizing IT, and with using huddles as a way to quickly do that on a day-to-day basis. If we approach this right, we can flip what I call flip the ratio. When we think about what happens currently in healthcare, most of us spend about a third of our time doing meaningful work. 2/3 of our time gets caught up in administrivia that doesn't really, we're typing away things that don't need to be typed because there could be some automated way to do it. We're dealing with delays on the phones, with other issues. And there's so much opportunity to redesign work. So instead, we could spend 2/3 of our time on meaningful work, 1/3 of our time probably still on things that just have to get done in order to make sure the work goes forward. but we can reduce the time we're spending on waste. If we can spend more time really focused in and caring on our patients, and less time dealing with insurance companies and other things, what would that mean for your own work-life balance, for your ability to care well for your patients, to improve safety and quality, experience access and productivity, improve the capacity to actually reinvest more to make work even better? We redesign using processes like Lean. You may have seen a workflow chart like this. And it's important when someone does this that they don't come in and tell you, oh, we did it this way in some other place, you just do it that way, things will be fine, because every place is different. You have good ideas about what's wrong. You have good ideas about how to fix it. So it's important that the people who do the work be involved in redesigning the work. It's not uncommon to have an expert coach come in to coach you through that process, but it's critical that the people who are doing the work are involved in redesigning the work. Quite often, if I go to an office and ask people, can you give up 3 or 4 days to help redesign the way a patient gets checked in at the front desk, or gets moved from the waiting room into the exam room, so that the patient's completely ready for the doctor? People will look at us and say, well, we don't have that kind of time. There's no way. We know our patients need us, our colleagues need us. We can't be gone for 3 or 4 days. And I'll ask if you ever take a vacation or get any extra education, because when you're doing those things, you're not there for your patients or your colleagues. And when you come back from your vacation, you may lose all of that replenishment you had because you come back to such chaos. The time you spend actually redesigning work is some of the most valuable time you spend when you're not actually in the middle of your job caring for patients. Now, it doesn't always have to be a 3 or 4 day event. Every day we can do this with a huddle, because the huddles really effectively address these drivers of burnout. They can be 5 to 7 minutes long. Some offices go 15 minutes. Whatever length it is, you want to make sure you don't exceed the length that you're assigned. But in those short few minutes, you can actually get a lot done. You can start by coming together with the whole team and acknowledging and appreciating what somebody else did to help you out the day before, or somebody will acknowledge you for something you did. That addresses that issue of insufficient rewards. You can prepare for the day. Do you have the capacity to manage the demand coming today? What's that schedule look like compared to the staffing you've got today? The equipment is it working or not? Do you actually have all the supplies you need? You may not have the capacity for that demand today, but if you don't, and you know it at the start of the day, well, you can prepare much better and have contingency plans in place to make your day go better than it would have otherwise. Most offices will look at metric performance. How are we doing? What's our visit volume looking like? Are we meeting our quality goals? Any number of different things that are important in order to care for patients well, and in order to make sure the insurance companies are paying well. Tracking those on a daily basis at the front lines, you can actually then identify when something might be slipping and start to solve for that. In fact, problem solving is the 5th and last part of a huddle. And it may be fixing some metric performance. It might also be just fixing something that went wrong the day before. You might have been busy in the middle of your day. You jumped up, ran to the copier or the printer to get something, and it's out of paper. And it's one of those little irritants that drives you crazy. You swear you're never going to let it happen again, but it backed your day up a few extra minutes. And yet, by the time the day's over, you've forgotten about it because there's so many other things that hit you. And then the next week it'll happen again. And when it happened to me like that, I was just all the more frustrated. When you take those little problems, put a note on the huddle board so the team comes together the next morning and says, hey, this was a problem yesterday. What do we think? Is this a big enough problem? We should all have someone work on it and come back to us with a solution. You can start to solve a lot of these little problems. I call them pebbles in your shoe, little things that irritate you. And often to start, when you're beginning with this work, well, there may be a lot of pebbles in your shoes, but over time you can get rid of them and you can make that workday so much better as a result. Now, lastly, let's talk about the culture, the management system, how everybody relates to and cares for each other in the office. Because when we do this well, we can really reduce cynicism by empowering people who have great ideas about how to do things, making sure we're aligned around success for the organization. Here's a few things that either you can participate in or your manager may be doing to help make sure things work well. The key is transforming the relationship between People who lead, people are managers, and the people that they manage or lead. It's that relationship that is so key. And it's important because something we haven't recognized as much, and the administrative work you do is knowledge work. There's a famous management consultant guru, he's since passed away, Peter Drucker, and he defined knowledge workers as people who have to think for a living. You know, when you're going through your day by day, patient by patient, you're really solving problems. You're innovating because every single patient comes in with something different. It may be a frustration they've got. It may be a particular issue about their insurance or their meds or their lab needs or something else. And you've got to help them figure out how to take care of their issue at that moment. That's real time. You call it micro innovation. If you're not doing that well, the job day's not going to go well. In fact, honestly, people who work on the phones, people who work at a front desk, they know more about that work than the doctors do. For myself as a physician or as a manager, I tried to, and we'll talk about shadowing, tried to follow people when they're doing the work. I think nothing scared me more than thinking I was going to sit at the front desk and try to check a patient in the middle of a busy morning, because I didn't know how to do that nearly effectively as my front desk staff did. And with knowing that you know more than this, that you need to solve problems, autonomy is a necessity. I like to tell the story for physicians when I was leading this 300 physician group with 1,100 staff members, that when I was a doctor and something went wrong, I wanted the autonomy to fix what was wrong. When I became the CEO and I had 300 doctors and 1,100 staff members all wanting the autonomy to fix what was wrong for their problem, that really scared me, because I thought, everybody's been doing their own thing. We're all going to fall apart, and from entropy, it's all just going to, disappear. I was really tempted to just become a top-down manager, just to tell people what to do, expect them to do it, and if they didn't do it, well, there'd be consequences. But I knew that wouldn't work, and so we found a way, and we'll talk some about how do you do this in a way that empowers people to solve problems while making sure we're all aligned around enterprise-wide success. The key to this is, one of the keys is psychological safety. There's a famous professor, Amy Edmondson at Harvard, who's written about psychological safety extensively, which says the key is that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up, whether it's with a good idea or admitting they made a mistake. Paul O'Neill was CEO of Alcoa, the largest aluminum manufacturer in the world. He ran this company based on a concept of supporting worker safety. And he had 3 questions. He called them the R questions. Am I treated with dignity and respect by everyone? Do I have the resources I need to do my job well? And am I recognized and thanked for that? Again, creating this atmosphere where people felt valued and they knew they could do their job well. It's so important that when we have that respect, that we also are aligning, and we align around what is most important. I'll often ask a live audience, who's the most important person in your organization where you work? And in healthcare, it has to be the patient, because without a patient, there's no reason for our job to exist. The most important thing that happens to that most important person actually happens because of the second most important people, which are the people on the front lines of care: the receptionists, the nurses, the doctors, the lab technicians, the x-ray techs. Anybody who's interacting with a patient has an opportunity to make that interaction a healing interaction, some way to reduce somebody's anxiety or worry, perhaps relieve their suffering, do some procedure, makes them better, educates them to be healthier. Those healing interactions are the most important thing we do for the most important person in our organization. When we realize this and focus here, this is where we create great care. Now, for myself as a family doctor for 25 years, I had 100,000 healing interactions in my career. As I moved up the management ladder down this organizational chart that's inverted here, became that person at the bottom as the CEO, I was no longer seeing the most important person in my organization. My job was to support the people who were supporting the people on the front lines so they could do that well. And not only middle managers being able to support people on the front lines, but also all the additional support staff, HR, finance, IT, all of those roles are key to making sure the most important thing is that we're making sure people on the front lines have what they need, that you have what you need so you can care for your patients well. Excuse me, I've got just a bit of a cold today, so I have to catch a drink every once in a while. Now, to make this happen, it takes leadership. Leadership to lead change takes courage and commitment. We're going to set expectations and drive culture change. And leadership makes so much difference. You know, if you've had people who were great leaders in the past, maybe you have someone who at some point in the past wasn't a great leader, that you do better when there's great leadership. And I've seen this in places when I was running an organization that had 40 different offices. I could tell who the great managers were by how the culture and the mood in each office varied by the quality and skill sets of the manager. A lot of those skill sets can be learned. So it's not to say that, you know, that there's a problem when things aren't well. We know we can make them better, but the key is to be out there, be seen and heard when you're doing that. That's called rounding, right? And there's two ways to round that are a little different. One is actually shadowing people while you're working. It can feel intimidating at first, but when you know that they're doing it because they're trying to find out what's not working well for you, how can they help you do better, then it actually can be very positive. And attending huddles. Once you're doing your huddles, if someone from another office comes and observes, they're there to help out. And if you're a leader and you're attending a huddle, you have to be careful. You can see problems. You don't want to just fix them. You want to develop everybody else become a great problem solver themselves. The more you can find time to check in and meet with your leader, the better. We'd like to set up actually formal meetings where leaders will sit down with a group of frontline workers and talk about what's the challenges you're facing. You really hear those directly, taking notes and then following up on those. And from this, actually, both people learn new perspectives. You learn things about the challenges your boss has that you might not have understood, whereas they'll learn a lot as well. One of the most effective ways to put all of this together is to use the daily huddle as a foundation for communication. Once you've had the daily huddle, you know what the problems are, you've got ideas that need to be fixed. Some of them can be fixed easily in the upper right-hand corner there where the staff and the supervisors are meeting. Others need to actually get escalated up through the managers and directors where they may have a huddle, and then huddles even at the VP, and if you're in a large organization, at the CEO level. That way, issues can get transmitted up the chain. If you need resources you can't get locally, you can make sure people know higher up so they can get them to you. And there can be communication from the senior leadership back to the front line, so you understand what's going on in the organization overall. Gives you better context to work in. Now, you might look at this and think, this looks like a pretty diagram, but I don't think that really happens in any organization, probably not in mine. Well, in fact, in the last couple of years, you probably have had something like this happen in your organization. Certainly in larger organizations, when COVID hit, people created command centers. These command centers met 2 or 3 times a day because things were so chaotic on the front lines. Everybody was coordinating. How are they going to take care of problems? Whether it was IT, supply chain, HR, senior leaders in nursing, medicine, administration, everybody had to come together to collectively solve problems, to help people in the different offices on the front lines to make sure it was working well. And and we showed that we could actually change quickly. We used to think we couldn't, but now we demonstrated we can. What's happening now, though, is burnout's still becoming a significant issue. It's impacting us in so many ways. And yet this level of intensity, we're not using this anymore to manage these intense problems that in many ways are creating a threat to our organization. When we don't have enough staff to man the front, to have people at the front desk, man's a terrible term, isn't it? To have people at the front desk, to have people in the back offices, to make sure the doctors are there, the nurses are there, the front desk is there, everybody's supporting each other, but there's not even enough people to do that. Well, this is threatening our ability to care for patients. So there is this existential threat, and we have the opportunity, if we address this properly, to make a real difference. In fact, if we use these same approaches, well, we create a strategic advantage. I like to call it organizational resilience, not personal resilience, but the ability of the organization to adapt quickly to things that are changing around it. Because that's what Darwin told us, was in order to survive, it didn't matter how big or strong or smart you were. It didn't even matter, if your company had the best marketing out there in your area. What matters is your ability to adapt to these changes. Putting those together makes a huge difference for the organization to be successful, it also makes a huge difference for you to be successful, for you to thrive, for you to really love your job. And in fact, in places where we've done this work, we've had people tell us, I was going to quit. I was ready to leave. I just felt like nobody cared about me and it was too hard to do this work. Once we started doing things like huddles and other activities like that, wow, it really felt different. We felt like a team. We felt like we were working together. This is doable. These are real quotes we get from people. So you can make a difference. You can find a great work environment. You can reduce burnout. And now's the time. What better time is there for us to step back and realize we need to make healthcare workplaces healthy places for healthcare workers to work? When we do that, it takes commitment. Everyone has to say, I'm going to be part of the change. I'm going to make this happen. I'm committed to my coworkers. I'm committed to my patients. I'm looking forward to making this happen. So thank you so much for paying attention. And we'll open it up now for questions. Adam, I'm eager to hear what people have to ask.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. DeChant. What an awesome presentation. I think as our audience knows, Dr. DeChant, you've done a lot of fantastic work on clinician burnout, and there's a lot of research and information out there on that. But it's not always easy to find information about front office burnout. And like you said, these workers are doing really important work and knowledge work. So thank you for offering some of that insights to our audience. I'm thrilled to share some of the questions we're getting. Audience, please keep sending in questions. We'll get to as many as we have time for. But Dr. DeChant, I think I want to start kind of with like a kind of a big picture question. And that is, if I want to take action today around burnout, what are the easiest, simplest solutions that can prevent or eliminate burnout among administrative staff?
I think the first thing is the relationship with the person that you report up to, or if you are a supervisor or a manager, relationship with the people who report to you. And you can do that simply by spending some time together. As a manager or supervisor, go shadow and watch the people doing the work. There's so many frustrations people have, and it's hard to understand them all unless you actually watch the work as it's being done. I've always learned so much by doing that. If you're on the front line, if you're at the front desk, and your manager's expressing frustration, ask them to come and shadow you. Say, you know what, let's just come and watch what I'm doing. If you see what I'm doing, you can see where the challenges are. Now, you may or may not have a relationship where you really feel like you can do that, but that makes such a difference. And so that, I think, as the first thing is just, take a look and see what each other does, and do it with an atmosphere, an attitude of curiosity. Really, it's about learning first. We might have a great idea. Don't just throw that idea at people. One of the things I used to do when I was younger in my career was I knew I had great ideas, and I did. But the way I went about trying to get them implemented was just to tell people, this is what we should do. And if I said it loud enough, often enough, everybody would get in line and just do it. And of course, that doesn't give other people the opportunity to contribute their ideas. Everybody has to work together. So it's creating that openness really makes a difference.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Totally hear where you're coming from. And I think, Dr. DeChant, one of the things you said that resonated with me was around work overload. And it's something I think we think about a lot here at Phreesia when it comes to burnout. Because really, right now, staffing shortages are making it near impossible to hire more staff. So, the volume of patients isn't going away. If anything, sometimes it's getting, it's increasing. And so you can't necessarily control that. You can stop taking patients, but like you said, that's not good for the bottom line. And you can't hire more staff necessarily. You can't find that staff. So what else do you think leaders can do during this time of staffing strains to reduce that staff burden?
This is where I think the huddles can make so much difference, because there are all these little things that when you're middle of the day, when you're feeling overwhelmed, you've got probably a good idea about how to fix things. Or, even committing, even though it's tough, commit some time to really understanding and redesigning. when we did major redesign where I was the CEO, the very first redesign effort we did was to actually redesign the front desk. We had an office which had 18 doctors in it and had 9 front desk people. And there were long lines of people waiting to check in, and everybody's frustrated. There were a lot of mistakes being made. We sat down and we took a team, a couple of people from the front desk and with doctor, nurse, and others, IT person, analyzed what was going on. In the course of a week, redesigned the workflow and realized we could do this in a way that we only needed 6 instead of 9 people at the front desk, and we could check people in faster and more accurately. But we eliminated so many things where somebody was walking across the check-in space because something wasn't right next to them what they needed, or we were making things too complex in the check-in process. And as we learned that and made those changes, it really had a big impact. Now those 3 people that were no longer needed, those positions at the front desk, those people didn't get laid off. We had plenty of other need. So
Right.
one of them helped staff another office. One of them actually helped with our improvement efforts. One of them went into the back office and supported the nurses and the doctors in the back office. There's always need, but we're oftentimes wasting time, and you feel that waste. You know what that waste is. Pulling together teams and working on this makes a huge difference.
I love that reference there, Dr. DeChant, because I think it's really interesting when we think about how technology can help us work with fewer staff. We're not saying we're going to get rid of any staff. God, no, we need those staff for other purposes. Sometimes, frankly, more complex, more fulfilling, often more important things, than some of the manual tasks that we're going to use technology for. So I want to get right into that. Like, what are those tasks that we should be applying technology to prevent burnout? Where are like kind of where are the places that we can do that so that we can bring people to tasks that they're less likely to burn out from?
Yeah, well, anything that's repetitive, where there's this whole process of identifying what you do over and over and over again that actually could be programmed so that you don't have to keep doing it all the time. Certainly a lot of data entry are things that, every time you're doing multiple keystrokes, asking, is this something that could be done some different way? If you're searching through a schedule trying to find open slots, there's technology out there that can help you do that so much more efficiently. Pretty much anything that you're doing that starts to feel really frustrating, there's probably a tech solution either already developed or in process. And Phreesia is just full of those fantastic solutions. In fact, personal story, I see an orthopedist and I realize that they actually use Phreesia as their front end. As I'm going to make an appointment, that's what I see on the URL when I first sign in, is Phreesia's helping me to make that appointment, which is really cool.
Well, and that's a great story, Dr. DeChant. And I swear we didn't tell Dr. DeChant he had to talk about Phreesia. This is a thought leadership webinar about burnout. But yes, we would say, Dr. DeChant, that, I think when we think about burnout, we think as many things as we can get the patient to help us with, to provide that information, because not only are they're gonna take that work off of whether it's clinicians and it's screening, or if it's the front office where it's data entry of intake, we're going to get more complete and accurate information, and we're also going to take that burden off of the folks who are working in the office. Dr. DeChant, one of the things I want to stay on that topic of technology for a moment here is, one of the things I think some people get concerned about is implementing technology to solve for burnout, whatever the software might be, but then worrying that change might cause more problems, cause more fatigue among staff, because it can happen. So can you speak to how do you ensure you're not just taking a product off the shelf, but that you're implementing it in a thoughtful way? Because it's not just as simple as buying something, right?
Right. Well, that's where the redesign work makes a difference. Thinking through, understanding the workflow of your workflow, understanding the workflow of the technology, understanding how those two integrate. And then as you deploy it, quite often starting with with a test site or the pilot site. And in that pilot, you'll see You'll identify little problems that you otherwise hadn't been able to identify ahead of time. And you can continue to make adaptations. And in fact, when we talk about huddles, and that problem solving, the little pebble in your shoe thing, a lot of those are adaptations you're making to workflows that are either driven by IT or just by other regular, types of human interaction. But it's that you're constantly adapting, and certainly implementing IT effectively. It takes thoughtful pre-planning and then thoughtful deployment and continued thoughtful adaptation as you go forward.
Absolutely. As far as the thinking about, just I think other things we want to talk about. One more question we got was, looking into 2023, are there things that we should be thinking about in the year ahead? Big picture trends, changes that could exacerbate burnout that we should be able to get ahead of?
Well, probably the biggest is still the staffing issue.
Okay.
People are struggling. And the key to success there, if you create an environment where people want to work, where they feel valued, you're not going to have the staffing shortages. People will be drawn there. We talk about the great resignation. It's actually a great reshuffling. People are leaving places that they don't like to work. They're looking for places that provide meaning, provide value, make them feel valued and welcomed. They're looking for places where they feel like they're in community, where things are working well with each other. So no question, staffing is one of the biggest challenges. The other is just being able to become more productive, and oftentimes using IT properly can make a huge difference. We're seeing great advances in voice technology to reduce typing. We're seeing advantages in just AI being able to understand what's happening in a process and give you information about what else does this patient need that you might have not thought of while you're still real time with the patient. Make sure that you're able to address that as well, or search through the chart to bring things forward for you that otherwise might have been missed. So all of those we're going to see continue to advance. But really, ultimately, it's about creating that place that people want to work. You will draw staff if you've got that place.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. DeChant, that's all the time we have for today. Really appreciate your time. I want to sincerely thank you for an engaging and informative presentation. Audience, again, if you have any questions for us here at Phreesia, you can request a consultation using the form on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also email us at the email you see on your screen. This is our last thought leadership webinar for the year. So thank you so much for joining us, for all the great webinars we've done in 2022. We can't wait to see you in 2023 and continue to learn and grow and just have just such a great audience for these webinars. So thank you for the questions. Thank you for the presentation. Dr. DeChant, thank you so much for being here, and have a great day, everyone.